For this episode of the podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Eli Gembom. He's a partner at Segal LLP, an accounting firm with over 100 employees. We sat down to talk about his immigrant path to business leadership, his struggle with cancer, his charitable work, and more. He's a really funny and insightful guy that I love talking to, and I think you will really enjoy hearing his story and leadership advice. So with that, on with the show. All right, I'm joined today by Eli Gembom, CPA, CA, and partner of Segal LLP, and also my longtime friend. Thank you very much for joining us today, Eli.
I wish you started with longtime friend, friend from high school, longtime friend, and then all that other stuff afterwards.
Okay, well, we'll be sure to share as much personal details throughout this. So we're here today to talk about your role as a business leader and also some of your personal experiences, and that's actually where I'd like to start. So you're not born in Canada. Why don't you tell us a bit about where you came from and how you made it here?
So I came here when I was 8 years old. It was actually just before the wall fell down, so it would have been 1989 going to 1990. I was born in a small town in Kazakhstan, and then we lived in Uzbekistan for most of the time. But I was born in Kazakhstan, and I lived there until I was 8. And then we did a whole long immigration to Canada. In those days, you actually had to move to an intermediary country where you'd apply for status, because in the Soviet Union, you just couldn't walk into an embassy and say, "Hey, like, we want to become like capitalist pigs and move out to the West," right? So that was the process of how we came here.
Okay, so you're a kid, you're young. What do you remember about that time in Uzbekistan? Like when we're kids, it's all fun, right?
Yeah,
But obviously, your parents had some strong motivations to move.
yeah. When you're living in a third world country, it's probably better as a kid because you have.
Is it a third world country? Is that a fair?
It's I forget what I don't know exactly what the classifications are, but it's not a nice place, right? Like, you sort of like close your eyes and, what would it like to live in a small town in Kazakhstan? Like you don't get like a Starbucks or a Pinkberry or anything, right? Like, it's not a nice place. But as a kid, because you have no basis of comparison, like, my memories of it was that, there was just a lot of time hanging out, and there was not a lot of, you have to be in bed by this time, or, it was sort of like, it's not like kids today where they have to come, be back at a certain time, and, and this and that. It was very, I remember just being very free. But, probably for my parents, it was, life of poverty. We lived in a one bedroom apartment. Me and my sister were in the one bedroom, and my parents slept in the dining room slash kitchen slash the only other room in the house. And I think for the Soviet Union, that wasn't like a bad life either. That was like, solidly middle class, right?
Okay, so then you're a kid and your parents tell you you're moving. What are you thinking? Like, what are your thoughts? Like, excited, scared? What?
Again, it was just, I know, I'm sure, like, I'm trying to think back because, right now we were looking at moving to another house. I remember my kids being afraid they have to change schools. There was probably some of that, but I don't, kids are so malleable, right? So I probably, I'm sure I was, a little nervous, but it wasn't a big deal. Like, my dad was my age when we moved here. I can only imagine how much of a bigger deal it was for him and my mom.
So then coming to school, new schools, I mean, did you know any English?
No, and but, I what I do remember is I remember walking into my first day at Associated Hebrew School, and I remember just a bunch of people going, "Oh, not another Russian," and like, and I hear them, right? I hear them, but that was my memory. And, I didn't speak a word of English, right? Like, I was 8 years old. I picked it up pretty quickly. My sister is 6 years older than me. I think for her, she was 14, right? I think for her it was probably a bigger struggle than it was for me.
So, on a slightly related note, apparently there's a really pivotal threshold. Like, it's either age 11 or age 12 that when a person comes to learn a new language, if they're before that threshold, it's super easy.
Yeah.
And if they're after that threshold, it's like, they have thick
12
accent.
years old. 12 years old is that magic number. Like, I see with my sister and, our mutual friend Mickey, right? He
Yes.
he was just on that, cusp, right? Anyone north of 12, like sounds like a Russian spy, and anyone under 12 sounds like a better Russian spy, right? Because the accent is just immediately gone, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you adjusted well
Mhm.
to Canadian life, Canadian education system. Your parents did well,
Yeah,
prof-
they did well. Yeah, they were IT people, and they came right in the '90s, and there was like giant brain drain in Canada, and anyone with any like I think IT experience was just snapped up. So they were lucky. Not everyone was as lucky as they were, and they got good jobs. And over time we entered Canadian middle class, which is much better than Uzbeki middle class. So it was good.
you were just all going to town and telling them that the neighbor has to cut the tree down.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, we adapted pretty quickly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you adjusted well, and your parents created this middle class lifestyle for your family, and you're in the education system, and so naturally you're progressing through the education into post secondary education, and you have to make some decisions. So, what were you deciding when you first entered post secondary world?
Um, you like you sort of you sort of think back to yourself. You're in high school and you're like, well, what do I want to do when I become an adult? And you have no idea. Like you just the examples you have are your parents' friends, and then maybe your uncle, right? My parents were in the computer field. My uncle was in the computer field. The woman he was getting divorced from was in the computer field. My parents' friends were in the computer field. I'm like, what else do people do for a living? Like, how else do you pay for groceries? You got to go to computer science. So, I didn't really know what else you do. So I applied for computer science at U of T, and I got in, and I remember like within like 3 months, I'm like, God, this is like I can't do this. Is not for me.
Okay, so what was it about that why wasn't it for you?
I think it was a lot of, and maybe it's just a sort of a stereotype that sort of I kind of just picked up in the first couple of, months, but it's just a lot of just sort of being in the computer lab, being on the computer, being by yourself, trying to debug some code that just doesn't debug. Maybe mine didn't debug, trying to figure out Java. And like, I just like, it seemed, very, I don't want to say solitary, maybe it's not, but very kind of an introverted kind of a career. And this is coming from an accountant, right? So,
Well, I mean, it's
yeah.
I would say, so I work in technology, and for me, I always naturally gravitated to the computer. And so when programming came up, it was a natural thing for me to continue with that, figure out those problems. And even though there were frustrations in debugging and those things, because I always had this natural inclination towards that, it makes sense. Did you not have that inclination, or like as a kid, were you on the computer? Because that for me, I was always on the computer.
I mean, I was on the computer, but it wasn't like to solve problems. It was like to like, how could I beat StarCraft, or like Warcraft or, Red
You're
Alert.
not like poking the box.
I'm not, no, I'm not. And you know what? I just, I think maybe I just I didn't have the personality type, right? But there's a key for every hole or whatever.
Okay, so that point you pivot to accounting. Why accounting?
So it was a practice. So computer science was out, and I think I failed miserably at that, and I sort of my parents are practical immigrants, and there's not like, listen, if this is not for you, that's fine. Spend the next 3 years discovering yourself, take some improv classes, really figure out who you are. Like that's not them.
So
Like
you didn't go to Bali.
no, I didn't go to Bali exactly. I didn't like do some surfing. While trying to find myself. I'm like, okay, I need to find something that will pay the bills because my parents are gonna kill me. And to me, accounting seemed like a practical answer. I mean, that was all it was. Like it was something that I would be able to support myself because my parents aren't paying for improv classes.
Okay. So now, at what point then you must have been apprehensive? You'd already left one program.
Yeah.
So now you're going into uncharted territory. Was there were you concerned? Was there a point where you thought it wasn't going to work out, or was there a moment where you're like, okay, this is actually for me?
Um, wow, it's like you have a segment producer like lining up all these talking points. Yes, there was. There was. Um, you know what? I didn't know that this was the right choice, and like I again, I didn't know anyone that was an accountant or anyone that was in the business world. I didn't know what the end result of this path was. Um, so when I was sort of maybe a year through my program, not even, just under a year, I was in a store buying a mattress with my parents. It was actually Sleep Country, Canada,
Why buy a mattress anywhere else?
as they say. And I was with my parents, and I noticed this sort of older gentleman pull up in a Jag, and he was probably in his 50s, and he had like I guess his wife, girlfriend, who I later found out was his wife to be, then who wasn't afterwards, but anyway, and she was gorgeous. And he pulls up in a Jag, and I noticed him, but anyway, he walked by, and then I remember I was standing in line, and I said something to my parents, and then him and his fiance laughed. And then, we started talking, and he's like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "Well, I'm taking accounting. I don't really know what I'm supposed to do." And I'm like, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "I'm a partner at an accounting firm." And I'm like, "Okay, I could do this, that sounds appealing." Like maybe not sort of well, actually, no, every part seemed appealing.
You think you become an accountant and you get a pretty girlfriend?
Pretty, yeah, and I love my wife very much. So, but yeah, sure, you get a pretty younger blonde.
Didn't know her at the time.
That's fair enough, right? And you get a Jag, right? So we're talking. He's like, "Well, listen, call me when you graduate. Like I'll see what I could do." And I remember my mom, again, she's like a practical Russian immigrant, like hardened by Soviet times. He's like, "Oh, he says that to everyone. You just might as well throw that card away." And you know what? 3 years later, like 2 or 3 years later, I actually called him, and I said, "Hey, do you remember me? We met at Sleep Country, Canada. Blah, blah, blah." And he said, "Yeah, of course I remember you. Come in for a job interview." And which like blew me away. And then I came in for a job interview, and that was my first job. That's how I got in. And back in those days, to be a chartered accountant, you had to work at a firm, and that was actually the hardest part about being a chartered accountant is you had to get hired by what's known as a training office, which is a firm to make you a chartered accountant, similar to how you have to work at a law firm to become a lawyer, engineering firm to be an engineer, so on and so on. That was the hardest part, getting a job at a firm. And he hired me, which is amazing. His name is Enzo Testa. I think he's still in practice or maybe near retiring. And I owe my career to him. So very very appreciative to him.
That's fantastic. So you touched on something there. You touched on sort of what's involved with becoming an accountant. So maybe you can just expand on that for anybody who doesn't know what's involved. I don't think waiting outside a Sleep Country, Canada is part of it.
No, I figured that probably works for maybe 30% of the applicants, but for the other 70 that don't have a sleep country to go to. I mean, there's different kinds of accountants. There's accountants like me that work in what's known as public practice, and we're independent public accountants, and we do things like audits and tax and advisory work and help with tax structuring and work on all kinds of M&A deals. And we're essentially business advisors that advise our clients in all stages of the business life cycle. Then there are also I'm an external accountant. They're internal accountants that work inside a business, and they're controllers and CFOs and directors of accounting and accounting managers. Um, and I guess there's everything in between. But I mean, those are the typical streams. What you're required to do is you have to go to university and get a bachelor's degree, and then you need to go into what's now called the CPA program, the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. And there's all kinds of tests and examinations. And I didn't go through that stream. It was a little bit different in my day. But and then you need practical experience. So now you either work at a firm or at a company that's a training office. Maybe for Rogers Communications or TELUS or BMO, whatever, they would have a training office. And that's when that's how you become a CPA, which is what I am, a CPA CA.
Okay, now for maybe somebody who's coming to this field newly, you mentioned you were working. I mean, you're an accounting firm, but then of course you mentioned Rogers or other big businesses. They have internal accounting departments. Is there any advice you can give to people about which one might be better to approach, or distinguish between the two from a career standpoint?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm supposed to say it really depends on what you want to do. I mean, there's lots of people that, are very successful, and they become senior finance executives, and a lot of times, as you sort of work your way up the corporate ladder, you may start it with some being an accounting manager and being responsible for certain accounting functions, to being a director of accounting or controller, where you're responsible for the accounting of a whole business unit. Coming up from there, you may become the CFO, and there you're involved with the business and strategic decisions of the entire enterprise. And depending on what kind of company it is, you're advising on capital markets and issues of corporate finance, meaning acquiring other businesses, selling businesses. Um, and a lot of, sometimes the CFO role leads directly into the CEO role. There's lots of examples where uh, the CEO of an organization was formerly the CFO just because of their depth and breadth of experience. They are ultimately elevated to the CEO position, which is, you could have a very fulfilling and financially successful career taking that path. And how I would contrast that to the public accounting sphere is, there you're a professional advisor, and also you start off as a junior accountant in a firm, and you go through the ranks, and then if you're invited into partnership, you become a business owner with your fellow partners, and you're managing your practice, but also advising clients, right? So I think that, again, you could become very successful in both spheres, and there's sort of pros and cons to each side.
Okay, so you're a partner. We left you in your career. You just got your first job from Enzo.
Mhm.
So maybe you can walk us through that path from that time to, becoming a partner.
Right. So that was that firm. Enzo kindly hired me, and he actually hired my soon-to-be and current wife, Ines. And we both worked there. And I realized one of us had to go, because it's I think it takes a special kind to work with your significant other, and I'm not that kind, and neither is she. So one of us had to go, and I thought I wanted to see what else is out there. So I left to a larger firm called PwC, then it was PricewaterhouseCoopers. That was a great experience. I was there for 2 years, and I met lots of great people. And being at a PwC is like sort of being at like a U of T in your young career. It's like a big institution, and you meet lots of people, and you learn lots of things. But it was too big for me, and I never thought I would make partner there. And back from my Enzo days, I wanted to be Enzo, right? So I thought I'd never be an Enzo at PwC, and I found the firm I'm currently with, Segal. It's a mid-sized firm, and I'll explain what that is. But I thought the path to partner there was a lot clearer. So I left PwC and went to Segal. And after 5 years, I became a partner. Um, so just a little bit about Segal. We're a firm of about 100 people, and there's 13 partners, and we're actually growing I'd say quickly, and organically. Look, it's been a really great ride. And I guess your question is, how did I become a partner? Uh, in a lot of sort of the junior staff asked me that, like, what's the path to partner? And I, in my head, said to myself, I think the way to succeed is to make the life of the person above you as easiest as possible. So they have to rely on you, so that, the thought of them being without you is frightening to them. And by the way, this is what I say to anyone, right? Like if, and if you become indispensable, and the thought of you leaving is frightening to someone, you become crucial. And there's several ways you could do that. The easiest way is just do a great job, like as simple as that. Like, come early and come often, and be dependable, and show up on time. And like Woody Allen said, right? Like, showing up is like 70% of the job. Like, it really is, right? Just show up every day, show up on time. If you say you're going to do something, do it, right? And that was probably, I would say, a good chunk of it. And then um, also, I sort of saw, what do the successful partners have, and they know how to develop business. And I sort of said, okay, I have to develop business. I have to bring clients into the firm. I have to be a revenue generator. And what does that mean? And I just observed, the successful partners have a large network, and they're out there in the community, and they have lots of, I would say, meaningful relationships. And then I undertook to basically grow my network, and it's worked. I would say it's worked fairly well for me.
Okay, so you touched on something there that's interesting. You went to school for accounting, you earned these professional designations, but I doubt anywhere in those classes was anything about networking or anything about bringing in new business. So maybe you can talk about those skills, how you acquired them or developed them.
So I have to give some credit to our managing partner, Dan Natali, and he gave, he did not come from, I would say, a wealthy family, and he has a very successful practice. And he said, look, every time you come across a professional, don't take it, or like a center of influence, I guess I call it. Don't take it for granted. Like every one of every center of influence, if you work on a client, and you have, there's a lawyer there, there's another advisor there, a banker. These are all centers of influence, and you've just shared something together. You've worked on a client, you've accomplished some task. Those are the people you should be developing a relationship with. And it's just, it was a off the cuff comment he made, but I absorbed it like it just seeped into me, like immediately, right to the core. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. So then I made it my business to, every time I come across any individual that sort of, deals with lots of other business owners, or to get to know that individual, to sort of to meet with them, to really find out about what they do, and sort of have a meaningful conversation. And you develop relationships with lots of people, and I think people generally like to do business with people they like, right? People they could talk to, people they could have a drink with or have lunch with, and could talk for an hour, and it's not painful. Everyone assumes you'll do the job, and of course you have to ultimately you have to deliver, and we deliver, right? But really, it's just having someone get to know you, and then and they want to work with you, and vice versa, right? And it was just as simple as that. It's just, you make connections, and you meet people, and just, the rest will follow. And it was just sort of from a remark like that I observed. And I could say now, we have lots of up and coming senior people here. We're not letting them sort of figure it out like I did, just sort of stumble onto it. We're very proactive, and this is how we're developing the next generation, is sort of coaching them to say that, really there's no magic to it. It's just sort of, again, it's the showing up early and often of making relationships. You just do it consistently, often. You meet different people. It's not always like, okay, if I meet this person, what's in it for me? Maybe there's nothing in it for you, but you've made a relationship, and maybe that relationship, leads to nothing. Maybe that relationship leads to another relationship. Maybe you just meet someone that's kind of interesting, right? So, and then, and as long as you're consistent and you do it, I think in any field, probably not just accounting.
I think that's a great attitude, correctly, for not just fields but general relationships. If I'm sure you can take the same philosophy and apply it to dating. If you're meeting people and you're setting expectations on what you're gonna get, it's not gonna go well. Like it's like you're trying to meet interesting people. I don't want to dwell on this analogy,
No, no, please do.
but I think you're trying to, the goal should be to meet interesting people. The goal shouldn't be to get
The end
something.
result of whatever you're going to get. And something, I didn't even figure that out at first. Like I remember, like when I first started sort of, I'll call it hitting the pavement, I would get so nervous because I'm like, I'm having lunch with this person, and maybe they're a business owner, maybe, and I'm like, if I don't walk away with a sale, right? Like, that Glenn Ross, you ever see that, right? Always be closing, coffees for closers, right? Like, I'm like, okay, like, what did I close at the end of this? And I'd be like, I would be so nervous because I'm like, what did I achieve at the end of this? And like putting this pressure on yourself. And probably the same applies to dating.
Yes.
Like no one wants to deal with a sweaty, nervous wreck, right? And if like, as soon as you take that off the table, it's amazing how much further ahead you get, right? Like, I guess it applies to everything.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you're becoming a partner.
Yeah.
Up until this point, throughout your entire career and work life, you've been an employee.
Yeah.
And now you become an employer. So maybe talk about that and what that transition is like.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so it's hard for some people. I don't think it's hard for me because I honestly try to be a kind and decent person. In all seriousness, when I sort of think of my employees, I try to put myself in their shoes. I try to I try to treat them with kindness. And really listening rather than I hear you, I'm listening, right? And you know, little examples. If someone's working for you, in a way, it's not personal, right? If maybe someone's working for you and they made a mistake, it's not like, why did they make a mistake for me? Why did they let me down? Don't say, how come you made a mistake here? Why did it say, why did we do this? Why did we do this? Like, because we're working together, right? So, don't make it personal. Treat your people with kindness. And I think, I think you will earn a lot of loyalty from the people that work for you. And some of these people I think would want to they would want to see you succeed, right? Because you're helping them succeed. Um, Sometimes these people will leave and maybe start their own business and ventures. And I can't tell you how many times I've had former employees refer me work because, just because I sort of treated them, well, right? Again, it's not rocket science, right? You know, y- uh, you know, People when when they start their careers, when they're sort of young and coming up, they remember the good ones and they remember the bad ones because I remember the good ones and I remember the bad ones. And I never wanted to be the bad one.
Hmm. I think another analogy, uh, you say you work on a team, so sports is sort of an appropriate analogy.
I've never played any sports, so I'll take it on this.
You ever watch any team sport and somebody misses the shot at the end of the game or makes a mistake, and they have a press conference with the coach or the captain and coach, they don't say he screwed up, they say we screwed up, the team screwed up. It's still a team because yeah, that guy messed up one day, but somebody's going to mess up another day. So you're right, it's not personal, it's the collective, and people get on board with that. Okay, so I want to talk about continuing on that idea of you being a boss and making some decisions. Maybe talk about like some of the difficult decisions. So there was a scenario 5, 6 years ago where the government, the provincial government, forced a uh, increase on employment insurance premiums. I believe there was some type of government cost that was going to hit every business owner, and ultimately you have to make decisions about, like, it's going to hit your bottom line, so you have to decide. um, you have to make decisions, so maybe you can talk about that and use that incident, because I know in that case you chose to eat some losses rather than cut some employees.
So, well, the real issue. So for in 2008, we had a recession, and we resolved. And I wasn't a partner then, but I was sort of still part of the senior team. We made a decision not to have any layoffs, and a lot of firms cut people, and we made the decision not to do it. And I think that sort of speaks to, like, here I'm just like a shameless self promotion, but that sort of speaks to our culture. We've always been sort of protective and sort of people first, and people say that, but we didn't lay off anyone, right? All other firms were shedding people. We even took the approach, maybe this is a good idea to find some really great people that were let go that maybe shouldn't have. Um, Making decisions is, as a business owner, or even as an advisor to your clients, right? A lot of times the clients look to you as their, number one, the prime advisor. There was some survey where they said, like, which professionals do business owners trust the most? And it's the accountant. Lawyers are a great vital profession, but a lot of times lawyers are there just for one thing, maybe a deal, maybe a lawsuit, and then they're gone, right? The accountant stays around all year long, every year, and we have relationships going 20, 30 years with some clients. So, a lot of times we have to make decisions for our clients. And it's, sometimes it's easy and sometimes it isn't. And there's no there's no real magic pill of how do you make the decisions. But I mean, I would say the best way to make them is to be as informed as possible, is to try to look at it from every angle. be systematic. A lot of times our decisions come backed up by all kinds of spreadsheets and analysis. That's not always possible in every decision. But try to be as informed as possible. And in the end, sometimes you make the decision right away with your gut, and everything else is just to support it, right? But I don't know if there's like a magic pill for it.
Um, okay. So you've made partner. Things are going great in life. You get married. You
Yeah.
have kids, 2 kids, and life smacks you in the face.
Yeah. So that segment producer you have is awesome. Again, just picking you up for every point. Yeah. So I did get diagnosed with a type of blood cancer. Called cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. It was just around the time I had my first daughter. I always thought I had psoriasis, right? And it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And every doctor would tell me, "Oh, it's just psoriasis. Just suck it up and put on some lotion," which is it looks like psoriasis. And I think it kept worse and worse and worse. And I'm just like, I can't take this anymore. I have to get a. This was by this time a third opinion. So I went to a different doctor and they took a biopsy and I came into her office and she said, like, sit down. And she just said, "Okay, so your results came back, and you have something called cutaneous T-cell lymphoma. It's kind of like it's actually a type of blood cancer." And then there's like a lot of times, you see like Saving Private Ryan, and like a grenade goes off, and you have that high pitched squeal, and you just hear like muted sounds. It is really like that. It is like when you hear something like that, and you're like, cancer is something older people get, or it's something other people get. It's not something you get, right? Like you're the star of your own movie. Like how could you? And she just kept talking, but I heard nothing. Like I heard absolutely nothing. And then I wasn't even like I remember like I wasn't even sure that what to even ask her. I said, am I gonna die? I remember saying that, and she's like, well, not maybe. I think we need to do some more tests, is what she said. I know, I know. So then I had to go see another specialist, and they did another, I guess, test, a biopsy, where they take a piece of your skin. And I remember, so that one, the news was better. Then they said, look, you actually have stage one of this disease, and for anyone that knows cancer, they come in staging, stage one, two, three, four, and the higher you get, the worse it is. So I was lucky to get stage one of this thing, and and he said, you know what, like it's probably treatable. Like you're probably not going to die from this. Like I'm not putting it in writing, right? But like most likely, if people caught with your staging, it's just sort of like uh, like a like a lifelong, it's like a sort of a chronic lifelong thing that you have to just get treated for. But there was probably 2 weeks between the first meeting and the second meeting where you're like living with an existential crisis, right? Because you don't know you don't know how long you're going to live, right? And like, I have to just say one thing, like when you come up with these existential crises, what's the plural of that? Doesn't matter. Crises, right? It really turns down the volume on everything else, right? Like you really come to, and again, this is a cliche, but it's true. You come to really appreciate that, like everything else is not that important. Like now, of course, over time, that feeling, the problem with that feeling is it doesn't last. There was probably a good year where I was actually really happy, which is a strange thing, right? I was so happy because all of the other things that sort of like bug you on a day to day basis, like something's late, this is not working out. You can't debug that code. Phil, I'm speaking your language. Um, you know, it doesn't matter. And it was such a happy, liberating feeling. And then unfortunately it went away. Like once in a while, I get tidbits of that. But if someone could like bottle that feeling of like you thought you were going to die, but you didn't, it is such a liberating feeling. So it's been, I did undergo treatments, and I'm now 8 years, what they call in remission. It can come back, and they say it's fairly treatable when they can come back. And apparently, it's one of those diseases that at the staging it's was caught in, it's fairly treatable. There's lots of different options. And again, the way it works with cancer, my understanding, I'm not an expert, right? But if you do a treatment and that doesn't work, it doesn't really work the second time, right? Like and the ones where there's not a lot of treatments, there's not a lot of like bullets you have, but this one's got lots of bullets. So like if this doesn't work, they try something else. If that doesn't work, they start something else, and the something else is like there's like a whole slew of them. So, tfu tfu tfu, to do a Russian thing and knock on the table. So far so good. But it was definitely a defining experience. And then when I was diagnosed with this, someone approached me to serve on the board of a charity. They're like, hey, this charity is looking for someone to be on the board, and it was the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, like completely unrelated. But I was just diagnosed with lymphoma, and they're like, well, hey, these people are looking for you to serve on the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And like I'm completely a-religious and agnostic, but I'm like, wow, that's a crazy coincidence. I'm like, I have to do this. Like, if I turn it down, I'm sure like I'm sending the wrong signal somewhere.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about that. So now you're on the board of a charity. What's that experience like?
Yeah, yeah. So they are is it the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. They raise money for research. There's a good part of their mandate is to raise money and to give grants to various physicians that are undergoing studies, in that area. And also, it's not just a fundraising organization. They also provide support resources for people that are diagnosed. A lot of times you get diagnosed with something like cancer, or anything really. You don't know who to talk to, right? Like your family, they don't have it. Like they sort of try to relate to your level, but they really can't because and they say a lot of things like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be fine," which is like completely aggravating. Or they act super shocked and scared, which scares you, right? So a lot of times you just don't have anyone to talk to. And this organization, for example, provides resources for someone that could call and just talk to someone because it's a lot of times very isolating when you have something like this, right? And then they provide resources for people to find, well, where can I get treatment for this, and where can I get treatment for that? So that's what they do, and they do good work. And there's lots of people that really care and are really passionate, and I thought I have lots of good memories of that organization.
Okay, well, to throw a little wrench into that,
Yeah.
you're at this organization, you're in remission, things are improving in life,
Yeah.
and something happens at the uh, the organization, the charity. Maybe you want to talk about that.
Yeah, there was, I guess there was a, from what I understand, there was an employee that was sort of unhappy that went to the Toronto Star and leveled some accusations on our charity. And Toronto Star published an article was, I would say, fairly negative about the kind of work that we did. And basically what the article said that it was more of a fundraising organization than like it was sort of more about fundraising than anything else. And it was an interesting experience because
Sorry, just to elaborate on that. Just when you say fundraise, like you're raising funds, but the money's not really going
to
to.
its intended purpose. Yeah, exactly. And you know I- it, it's an interesting experience because a lot of times you sort of read an article in the news, and then you sort of it's the printed word, right? Like everything there has to be 100% accurate, and the bad guy in the story is the bad guy, right? And the intrepid journalists are uncovering like a Watergate type scandal, and like, oh my god, I can't believe it. And then you never really know until you're on the other side of it. It was just how interesting in terms of there's some things they said, good points. At that point, we were undergoing a leadership change, and we were actually looking to address some of those points. And even we said, look, there's lots of things we could work on, and probably there's lots of things any large organization can work on, right? But lots of points that were, either A, misleading, B, not true, C, sort of taken out of context. And again, like not until you're on the other side of that, you really kind of see, and not to use the cliche of the day, how media works, right? And I'm not saying that with any kind of political bent or anything. It was just interesting, right? And I had the reporter on the Star article call me, and I believe it was the same reporter that later worked on the Rob Ford saga, or at least one of them, because I saw.
Robert Doolittle,
I don't
or
know, it wasn't her.
it was I forget the gentleman's name.
Yeah. And she called me, and trying to get a quote, and obviously I said, look, you have to direct your inquiries towards our executive leadership. But I will say that they, for every, I would say they got it 30% right. I'm not going to lie. 30% of the things we probably could have done better and been more efficient. And I think, again, If you were to take some inside person in any large organization, say find everything wrong with this organization, they'll find 30% wrong. I think 70% of what the article identified, I don't think was true. Um, Look, at the end of the day, the organization's doing well, and I think, you know, I will say that, they've come off not to link, my cancer with that, when you're faced with an adversity and if you tackle it head on, they overcame it, and I think they're a better organization now than, before that article.
Okay, but to clarify, you're no longer.
No, no, exactly, yeah. So I was the treasurer up until 2018 of that organization, and I'm no longer in that organization just because my mandate ran out, not for any other reason. But I could tell you they spend a lot of time. Um, I mean, the fundraising part was required because they have to raise money to give to the causes that they're passionate about. But I could recall so many meetings where other board members were so emotional about some new therapy that was found, or we had one therapy that we funded that is the basis for a very crucial cancer drug right now, and just that feeling that you had made an impact on people's lives, and I could tell you the people in that board cared, right? So, and that's again not something any article could really communicate, and it didn't because that wasn't the narrative, right? Like they wanted to paint a narrative, um, but I think that's what they got wrong about that article.
Okay. So we've sort of run through your career up to this point. You left there at 2018. You're with Segal as partner, and 2020 you're in these beautiful new offices that you've invited me to. So maybe you can talk about what's next for you, what's next for your career and your life, and what are you going to do in this sort of next stage?
So I've we have a fairly, I would say, large practice here, and I have a decent practice of my own, and I guess the question is what's next is I'm looking to continue to develop myself as a leader, and for example, in May I'm going to Harvard for a week to do an executive course on leadership, and what I'd like to do is sort of take the next step in my leadership, and continue to grow, and at a certain point, you go from being an employee to maybe being a senior employee to maybe being, I guess, sort of a manager of a book of business, a book of clients. At a certain point, you have to be I think the next step is to become a practice leader of some kind, right? And continue to develop and sort of be a leader in your practice and in your firm company overall. So that's I think my next stage is to develop my leadership skills within my overall practice. To that point, I'm actually I recently joined the management committee of this firm, so I am sort of part of the executive leadership of this firm. But it's what you do with that role and how you grow the firm and how do you go from where you are to where you want to be, and that's what I'm trying to work on right now.
Okay, and maybe is there any advice that you have for anybody who's just starting out and getting their accounting, their bachelor's, or starting at a firm, starting in the field, getting their designations?
Yeah, I hate that term "do what you're passionate about," or like, if you do what follow your, that's just like that I don't think that's useful advice. I think take on work that's challenging. So look to the future. Don't focus on the now. There's a lot of times where you got to pay your dues, right? And then when you pay your dues and sort of look forward, what kind of a rewarding both rewarding is not only monetary, but of course it's nice, right? But also rewarding from just a rewarding career you could have just because of what's in the now, right? There's lots of people that sort of start law and they sort of find it kind of it's a bit of a drudgery, but when they get to a certain place, they've paid their dues and they love it, right? Or people that start architecturally or engineering, right? The idea is don't focus so much on the now. Sort of look ahead to where you could be, and what opportunities that could bring you.
All right. Well, I can't think of a better place to end it. So I want to thank you, Ellie, for joining me today. And is there anything else that you would like to say to the people out there listening?
Well, Phil, it was great seeing you, and I look forward to your future podcasts. I won't be listening to this one because I can't listen to myself, but I'll be listening to the next one. And interesting to see what you do with this.
I want to thank Eli for taking the time to join me, and I want to thank everyone for listening to the show. We'll be back soon with another episode.